they were definitely dressed in Ukrainian uniforms, and they had Western rifles in the announcement that they made claiming responsibility. And probably Ukraine has obviously allowed them to cross the border and engage Russian forces there.
As the West plans to give more military aid to Ukraine, the one thing Volodymyr Zelensky guarantees is our weapons won't ever be used in Russia, which, given we haven't had nearly 75 years of nuclear standoff between the West and Russia, is a relief. But we learned from the Times this morning about a group of Russians who are fighting for Ukraine within Russian borders. The Times' assistant foreign editor is Maxim Tucker, and he's in Kyiv. Morning to you, Maxim.
Morning.
This is a really interesting story because I'm sure it's not entirely clear what's happening, but tell us what's going on. This is the city around Belgorod, isn't it, in Russia? There is fighting. Who is involved in the fighting?
So yesterday we saw tanks engaging Russian border guard checkpoints on the border with Belgorod, and then columns of Humvees and other infantry fighting vehicles entering Russia and pushing into three villages, where they engage Russian government forces. And it's quite astonishing. I mean, there's heavy artillery support, heavy tank support. It's definitely the largest fighting across the border we've seen to date. It's always difficult to tell what exactly has happened, but the Russian Free Russia Legion took responsibility for it on their Telegram channel. And Ukraine's military intelligence has been briefing that these are exclusively Russian partisans fighting to remove Putin.
But the question is, how much is the Ukrainian intelligence supporting them? And then I guess that's the further question is there any gear, is there any material that's been provided to Ukraine by the West that's getting into their hands?
Well, it looks very much that Ukraine has trained and equipped the Russian partisans. How much of that is Western gear? Obviously, it's none of the new tech. They may have had Humvees, but Humvees can be acquired from many places at the moment. They were definitely dressed in Ukrainian uniforms, and they had Western rifles in the announcement that they made claiming responsibility. And probably Ukraine has obviously allowed them to cross the border and engage Russian forces there. It's almost certainly an attempt by Ukraine to distract Russian defenses in the south of the country ahead of Ukraine's counteroffensive and force Putin to move his troops north to protect the Russian border.
And does it matter, Maxim? Say if some of that weapons are provided to Ukraine from the West, is that a line that's being crossed? Is that a propaganda tool that Putin will use, or is there anything to read into that?
Well, the West was very clear about not giving long-range weapons to Ukraine that would be used against Russia. I don't think there have been the same stipulation against kind of assault rifles and Humvees. So it was really about, if the US would provide long-range rockets like HIMARS, then Ukraine had to guarantee that they wouldn't be used to fire across the border, and they haven't done that so far. It's a clever way that the Ukrainians have employed to do this, because it does look like they are Russians fighting against Putin. Yes, they're backed by Ukraine, but it's exactly the same tactic that Putin employed in 2014 to create his hybrid war in the Donbass. This kind of implausible deniability, but there's really not very much you can do about it.
And what will they do when they're there, if they're fighting in Belgorod in that area? Does it feel like it's a distraction tactic? They don't want to. Will they start trying to seize towns? Is there an argument that there's anything other than creating a diversion to move defences that way?
Well, yesterday they did temporarily seize control of at least two villages and were fighting for control of a third village. But it's a very small fighting force. I don't think they're going to be able to seize a town. It really looks like a diversion and the kind of exposure of the Russian flank up north. And it also exposes the fact that Russia has spent millions of dollars on trying to build border fortifications along there, and they haven't been any good at stopping a partisan movement incursion.
Maxim, just finally, what's your assessment of the readiness for this counteroffensive? How do you judge where it is at the moment?
I certainly think we're in the final stages. This is part of Ukraine's shaping of the Russian defences, forcing the Russians to move their troops around, forcing the Russians to keep guessing where the actual final blow is going to come, and distract and demotivate Russian troops and keep them worrying about what's happening at home.
Yeah, we'll have to see whether that does the trick or not. Maxim, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
That's Maxim Tucker there in Kyiv. He's the Times' assistant foreign editor.